Sweet. Think we're doing it. What this is all about, this whole sharpening thing, and okay, cool. I'm getting weird notifications. Nice work, Gretschman. Couple things. So, if you struggled to make it here today, if you're like dreading sharpening your knives, and you're even looking at this video as like a way to procrastinate, one thing that I find that I'm gonna mute myself is try to find a way to make it worth your time, from the sense of like, I was not dreading this, but I was like, ugh, I gotta sharpen my knives. But I was like, what if I went live at the same time? And I also made like one of my favorite teas to drink with this. And so whatever that is for you, like time outside, time with friends, buy your favorite beer, decide to go to a place after you sharpen your knives. And I find that that can almost, like, I'm going on this rant as we kind of wait for some people to join, but, and even this, like the fact that you know that you can look forward to coming here and potentially just like asking some questions in the chat, I think that that's actually kind of cool, and that makes this worth, you know, like you're adding some positive reinforcement to something that could potentially be not negative, but like it's a chore, if that makes sense. So if you're here, if you're watching, drop a like, because that makes sure that more people on YouTube will be able to see this. And we're effectively going to get right into it. I will share one funny thing that happened in the move, which is like F's in the chat. My 3000 stone, I took it out of the box that I had packed it in after the move, and I went to go pick it up by one side, and half of it just stayed in the box, which is sad and unfortunate, but that is what it is. And you know, I still have half, and I'm just gonna sharpen on that half. I will be going over the knives that I just want to make sure that I'm properly live here. Yeah, perfect. You know, I will be going over the knives, but most of my equipment has not changed. And so if you have questions on what stones am I using, what, you know, like sink stands, I have a little elevation stand here that I sometimes use. I'm not going to use it today. Any of the stones that I recommend, I think it's kit.co/Justin Kana, or in most of my just kind of like YouTube descriptions. And I have tons I have a whole video. If you're new to the channel, I have a whole series of videos on how I sharpen things start to finish. And secretly, I wanted to go live today because I wanted to try this new camera setup, which I think looks pretty good. Like the fact that I can have two cameras going and I can do like a live, almost zoomed in version of what is happening on the stone, but then you can simultaneously see me, and then I can move around and the audio is going to come with me. That's pretty cool. And then as we get questions, if my hands aren't too messy, I'm going to kind of like go over and I'll try to pop your question on the screen so that everybody can see. Otherwise, I'll just call you out and we can just kind of go from there. So I'm also not going to be talking about kind of like edges that I'm putting on things. If anybody has specific questions on that, you totally can. But like, for example, for my diamond stone here, like I know what needs to get hit on the diamond stone, and I know which ones I can just start on my 1000 grit stone for. But like this is like a 300 grit diamond stone, and a couple of my knives just need like a more harsh kind of like edge reshaping. And so I will be hitting a couple there, and then I'm going to go 300, 1000, 3000, 6000, and I might strop with some magazines, newspaper stuff at the end, and we'll just kind of go from there. Knives I'm using. So maybe this angle's better. Do you like this angle better? Yeah. Togiharu 440 Wa handle. This is one of my favorites for cooking at home with right now. This is the Town Cutler Olneya knife, and this is the Nikiri that Galen makes, and it's phenomenal. I really, really like this one. I don't actually think that one's hit a stone yet. One of my favorite fish butchery, meat butchery knives. This is another Togiharu, but it's their dimpled. I think it's an Enox. Someone can check me in the chat. My Aura, I haven't used this in a while. It's actually weirdly getting some like discoloration on the bolster, which I wasn't really expecting, but that's what's happening. My trusted green-handled Ninox slicer. Also got my UX10. This has been on the channel ages and ages, the 9.4 inch. This really needs some help because I use this a ton. This is just the older Ninox petty. And then my Sweeson Enox Wah handle that I swapped for an Isaiah Schrader custom handle. So those are the kind of 6 knives that I'm going to go through, and we're basically just going to start, and then I'll get to some questions as I see them. But yeah, throw some music on, grab a beverage, and hopefully, you know, what would actually be helpful for me to see is if you want to leave in the chat how many knives you're sharpening today, if you're sharpening with us today. Like if you're going to be like literally just chilling here with your phone open or your laptop open and you're just going to be sharpening, how many knives? I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So I'm doing 8. I'm hoping this is probably going to be like an hour-ish. We'll see how long we can hang out. But yeah, curious how many of you folks are rocking. Oh, this is not very ergonomic for me, huh? New camera setup. Oh, it's actually fine. It's actually fine. So I don't do that many passes on a 300 because if you spend too much time here, it's going to be, you're just going to eat away at your knife. All right. So that's it, like for the most part, when I reshape something. I also have a pretty good handle on what the bevel ratio is on all of these. And so I'm also acknowledging that this is probably loud for you guys. There's some ASMR nerds, I'm sure, who love these noises. But this is by far the loudest stone. I know this one needs a ton of help. I was just a couple of pointers. If you're new to sharpening, you want to kind of not cut into the blade with your pressure. So when I'm on this side of the stone, I'm kind of applying my pressure this direction, and then I'm just doing kind of like a light push back up, and then I'm applying my pressure on the other side here. Let's see some numbers. So we have some 6, we have some 4s. We have some people who sharpened already, which is great. That means you're just here chilling. You did 5 today. Yes, I will be showing the Ninox Tsujihiki, how I sharpen that. And, you know, friendly reminder that as much as you can, use your entire stone. It's less work for you and better on your stones themselves. That actually honed up pretty nicely. Good job, Galen. All right. So that, well, you know what? Yeah, this needs a little bit of... I wish sometimes Ninox would put out like a different blade profile for the petty. Because like, it's such a nice, you know, like the blade profile is nice. But I wish sometimes that they would just do like a, so like these two are twins, right? Like I see these two as like the mama and the baby, you know? I wish they would do a petty blade profile that follows their Giotto blade profile. I don't know if anybody else feels that way. Where it just had like a little bit of a chunkier heel to it. That would be dope. All right. So that just kind of, you know, roughs things up a little bit, reshapes some things, gets everything back to a, you know. Okay, so let's pause here while we change stones and do some questions here. 4 or 5 from Gretchman. What kind would you recommend for cutting large amounts of hot, large briskets? I work at a barbecue smokehouse. So for this, you probably want like, that's why this blade profile, the 9.4 inch, is really nice because, you know, you're probably not looking for like precise cuts, but you get bigger surface area here. Whereas if you're using, you know, something like this, I think this is it's only an 8 inch. It might even be less than that. And I've talked about this in reviews before. You're just gonna your prep per minute with a knife that just has a longer length tends to go up, or it certainly does for me. Like, I don't have large hands, but I can grip a lot of food in my hands. And so if I have the ability with a larger blade profile to just kind of like go through more food per minute, that's how you're kind of tracking, this blade profile helps a lot. Now, steel wise, if you're not wanting something that's too, like, if you actually end up hitting a cutting board pretty harshly, this steel might not be great for you. And you might want something a little bit sharper that you can kind of just like hone a lot during the day. And yeah, if you're worried about chipping or something like that, like something that's super, super hard might not actually work for you. And so that's why I think there's actually been like a weird resurgence on the channel from the Victorinox Vibrox Pro knife, where like it must have gotten into like some weird butcher barbecue part of the algorithm, and a bunch of new barbecue people are kind of like finding the channel, butchers mostly, and are just kind of like sharing in the comments that like, this is one of my favorite knives ever, blah, blah, blah. And I think there's a reason for that, is because it's not too hard. And then simultaneously, like the handle is super beefy, non-slip. It's really nice. It's not fancy, but it's pretty good. Yeah, talking about, let's see, drawing on your white kitchen shoes. That's dope, Travis. Yes, no. Question was, do I have a flattening stone for my diamond stone? The goal is that if you get a good diamond stone, the steel on your knives shouldn't really like be wearing down your diamond stone, because you get a diamond stone for the opposite effect. You want your diamond stone to have this kind of like very harsh, abrasive nature. I did fix I have a normal stone fixer. I haven't necessarily heard, someone should link some resources in the chat if you have any readings that you have read about fixing diamond stones. In the probably 6 or 7 years that I've had this diamond stone, I've never had any divots or scratches or anything like that. And that's, I think, through a combination of just like, I don't spend a ton of time on my diamond stone. And then simultaneously, it's just hard. It's like a good quality, like hard diamond stone. And so that's probably part of it. Yeah, people in the chat basically said that diamond stones are mostly flat. Misono's Swedish carbon knives are great. No complaints. If you do end up wanting to check out some Misono knives, I do have the channel partner link in the description of this live stream for Corin, and that does help out, like, no extra price, but it's actually like, it's a free way to kind of like support me, because when you shop there, I get kind of a kickback from shopping through that link. And so if you folks are ever wanting to get Ninox stuff, Togiharu stuff, Misono stuff, sharpening stones, pastry brushes, even kind of like flatware and plates and bowls and stuff for your pop-up dinners, Corin's awesome. Yeah, that's a great tip, to just get a new diamond kind of attachment, especially if it comes off and you're noticing that you're getting some wear and tear. Another sharpening tip here, I'm just going to kind of like drop these as I'm thinking of them, is that you always want the pressure to be underneath where your finger is. And so I kind of keep my left hand pressing along the blade so that where the pressure is going is always perpendicular to the stone. So I'm going straight down to where my pressure is being felt versus driving the pressure from my right hand, which is controlling the angle. I do leave the mud on my stone as it's kind of, and sometimes like I have a little spritzer bottle. And so if I am liking the amount of mud that's kind of building up on the stone, I'll keep that there. Yeah, Trevor, I do this funny circular motion thing at the tip of the knife sometimes. That's just kind of a weird thing that I do sometimes. I don't know why. I don't know why I do it. It's like I just have, when I do like this, I have this just kind of like, I know it might not be technically correct, but it helps to remind me that I have to sometimes like change the angle and just compensate for the fact that I'm on the tip of the knife. Question from David, which is, do I recommend Ninox knives as a primary knife or like a secondary knife? It's like the benefit and the curse of Ninox's steel is that like it lasts super, like in my experience, and even it's the reason that I bought one is because I was skeptical too. I was like, these knives are like $500, $600, $700. They're made with these fancy handle materials. Like, can't I just get like a not a budget version, but like, do I have to get a Ninox knife? And I staged at a couple restaurants in New York, and a lot of the line cooks in New York use Ninox knives. And I would ask almost all of them, I was like, do you like your Ninox? And almost all of them would say something to the effect of like, it's like my longest lasting knife that I have. And that's really good because it can be your daily driver. Like the fact that this was kind of like, I would keep this on my station when I would start, and then I would do the reverse. So if I had, you know, like a chives cutting project or a scallions cutting project or a leeks cutting project, I would bust out this, which I also kept kind of freshly sharpened, because I knew, again, like this is long, I can go through a lot of food with it, and I would just kind of like I would do a lot of my heavier vegetable prep with this. And then if I was, you know, butchering a ton of stuff, I would do this one. And when I was working like a protein station where I would have to do like mirepoix for sauces, and I was cutting vegetable for staff meals sometimes, basically. And so this trio was kind of like the last like real station I worked, these were the three that I would use. So Ninox, Misono UX10, and Togiharu dimpled guy. And that was a great kind of trio that I would use. And then I would have, I think I had a petty that I would use sometimes too. Man, this is hard, sharpening and live streaming. Okay, let me catch up here because I want to make sure that I'm actually going to get this. Because if I don't get my sharpening done by the end of this live stream, or maybe we can just go to like 8 p.m. Okay. All right, now I can look. Let's see here. Yeah, the half moon motion where like you're doing like this, like I totally see that. And so basically that's what it is. That's just the difference. Oh, my phone is, I'm getting a phone call and my phone's vibrating. You guys can see that. That's kind of awkward. Let's see if I can decline it from here. Decline. Weird. Okay, anyways. Yeah, like when we talk about half moon motions, like that's effectively what I'm doing, where I'm kind of like, I'm doing a half moon and then I'm coming back up, and then I'm half moon and then I'm coming back up, and then I'm half moon. So maybe that's like a great explanation for why I do the little circle motions that look like circles, because I'm just going really fast. But yeah, you're right. There are a million ways to sharpen. I don't know if any of you folks are subscribed to Mareko Malmasi's Patreon, but he gave a great kind of like sharpening demo. You can follow him on Instagram. I had him as a guest on the podcast, and he's been on Joe Rogan and a bunch of other great, like he's such a great resource for knife knowledge in the community. And he does his knives, I almost think at like a 45-degree angle. And so he's like very ergonomic with how he sets up his knives. Justin, question about the curved part of a fillet knife. I think you almost want to do the same thing. I think you're talking about the tip, unless you're talking about the base of it. It's that same thing, this kind of like half moon motion, and you almost want to kind of like, you can go slow and kind of keep your finger here, and sometimes you can feel where the bevel is, and then that will tell you. And if it's a softer steel or you have kind of like a beater fillet knife, you can kind of use a coarser grit stone and just use some light pressure to kind of see, oh, if I really press it down, where does the angle go? And if I really hike it up, where does the angle go? And then you'll get a sense of, because I know a lot of people who use fillet knives like to have different sharpness levels on different sections of their fillet knife. And so, yeah, totally empathize with wanting, but you're right. It's also like, it's a different feel as you get into the tip. Okay. Let's see. Don't get me started on natural stones. I saw my first natural stone when I was just a wee lad at Corin years and years and years ago. And my most recent trip where I almost bought a natural stone was to a knife shop called I and Ohm, A-I and O-M, in Vancouver, in Canada. And they have a great selection of natural stones, and I was super close to buying some. Talking about like maintenance, right? Like that's why you see like almost none of these knives are high carbon knives. I mean, like they're high carbon knives, but they're not like exclusively carbon knives because it's a maintenance thing. It's a maintenance thing, and clearly I showed you this, right? Like I can't be trusted. Just kidding. Did I get one of I can't even say the name, Majime's knives? He is working with a friend of mine, Shota Nakajima. I don't know if it's like a sponsored relationship or if he just sent Shota a couple of knives. I spoke with Abe from Eating Tools about his knives, and you know I'm trying to be careful with how I talk about this because I don't want it to sound like I'm bashing his stuff. But I was like, don't those knives look like super thin? And Abe was like, yeah, he does like a pretty thin blade profile on his knives. And I'm just always so skeptical when I see things that are like super flashy and crazy, crazy thin. Like they're beautiful pieces. Don't get me wrong. They're gorgeous knives. But I'm very much so like, my background's in professional not high, crazy high volume, but like I need workhorses in my life. I don't need just kind of like pretty stuff to sit on the shelf. And it's not to say that his can't do that. It just doesn't scream that in the same way that something like this does. So that's that. If I'm missing questions, you might just have to resurface them. Because again, I'm working you. Trevor, that's great that you did your knives so long ago and they're still rocking. That means you're doing a good job. Yeah, electric sharpeners. Oof. That'll tear your knife up. You're just taking more off every sharpening session. I think it's a little unnecessary. What would you say the ratio between carbon and stainless was for folks who had expensive knives? Are you talking about like coworkers of mine or like people I've seen in restaurants? I'll answer as though that was the question. And I would say like I think chefs go one of two routes, right? They will either get to a place in their career where they're just like so intrigued by the promise of carbon knives, like super hard. They can get way sharper, obviously saying that you can get some pretty crazy edge geometry going on. And then also just like the pro feeling of knowing that like you have something that is like relatively high maintenance, like lures you in, and then you purchase one. And then most chefs that I've worked with or met kind of go one of two ways. They either like, oh cool, I have a carbon knife in my kit, and that's just going to be the one that I have and the one that I use whenever. So like I think my first carbon knife was a Honosuke knife. So it was like a butchery style blade profile. And what was nice about that is that I could just keep it sharp and use it for, when I was just doing heavy chicken volume or duck butchery. But I wasn't kind of reliant on it for a lot of my stuff. And so that, I think I have a couple other, I have a single bevel Yanagiba knife that I picked up in Japan. And then I think I have a couple others. But for the most part, I also have one that's clad, and so it has kind of like a carbon core to it. And so the ratio for mine kind of became like 90-10. So 90% of my stuff is like more or less stainless. And then I have like 10% that I just kind of have as just nice, fun, interesting blade profiles. Or I wanted to support a brand, so I bought it. And other chefs, they get their first carbon one and like they can't unsee it. They get obsessed with it. They like, it's not that they throw all their other ones away, but they kind of like, now the quest has started to like replace all your blade profiles with carbon, which I think is fascinating. And I totally messed up my system here that I normally have, so I can't remember where I'm at. So what I'll do when I'm sharpening, especially with a lot of knives, is I pick a stone, and when I do that stone, I put it back in facing one direction. And so right now I have 4 of my knives facing one direction and 4 of them facing the other direction. And so I can always remember, because then when I do the next stone, everything will be facing this direction. And that tends to help me. Let's see. Yeah, thin blades are nice, but that's my problem, is that like it feels nice for the first cut, and then it like if you want to have that as your home knife, or like I did a bunch of cooking classes when the pandemic was like at its peak, and it's super fun to like geek out about knives to people on a cooking class, because you're gonna have to literally cut like an onion, like a single onion. But talk to me about like, I'm 6 pounds into my 10-pound onion project on that super thin blade. I don't necessarily know if that's the knife that I would choose. Let's see. David, that's super kind words. It's awesome to hear that you're getting some value. And if it's helpful, and I suppose this is maybe a time to kind of pitch it, I have yesterday or 2 days ago was the first promo email for the Total Station Domination course. That went live to everybody who was on the email list for that. It's also linked in the description here. And so I'm doing a week of promo pricing for it. And so I think the lowest discount you get is like $80 off the course. And so it's 3 weeks long. I only talk about kind of like skills and principles that helped me when I was on stations to be more productive, be a better team member, be more organized. Like I really go through like writing an out of place list, talking with your station partner, writing a prep list, all of those kind of principles I cover. And we do it as a cohort. So it's not like a bunch of videos behind a paywall. It's me teaching live. All the other students are there live with you. And we do exercises together. And so, like I'll give you guys a new kind of like menu item and you guys have to write the prep list for it. And then we change so you work with other people. Like it's really, really cool. So we've done 2 cohorts so far. I know this is called cohort 2, but that's because we had a beta cohort and then we did the first cohort and now we have cohort number 2. And so yeah, that starts June 6th is the first live session and it's 3 weeks. So it's June 6th, June 13th, and June 20th. And again, it's like specifically designed for chef de parties, line cooks, like you're getting ready to become a sous chef or you're kind of taking your first job out of culinary school. That's who it's for. And, you know, I truly believe that I understand that life and that process more than most. And so I've codified all of it, everything I know. And so that's what I teach. And that's what the course is. And again, talking about someone like David, who's like 1-star Michelin in Denmark, meet other folks who are also on that path inside of the course. So it's on Mondays, and the live sessions start at 1 p.m. Pacific time, except for if you get the next package up, which includes group coaching. So it's just extra one-on-one time with me if you want to talk about getting a promotion, writing menus, navigating your career, should I go back to school, should I start an Instagram page, like all these questions that people ultimately end up asking. That starts at 12. And so I do an hour of group coaching and then we go right into the live sessions on Mondays. So yeah, thanks David. And you being the only relevant content creator for professional chefs. I don't know if I'd say that, but you know, I understand that I'm in a bit of a niche. I understand that I don't get on camera and slap meat around like other chefs do. Not talking smack. They should get their bag. Let's see. Affordable entry-level Whetstone. So that's an interesting question because aside from the food and the cutting board that you're working with, your Whetstones are kind of the only other thing that your knife touches. And so if you're trying to, you know, really optimize for longevity of your knives and really kind of like get some investment into sharpening as a skill, it can really be intimidating to look at like a $75 Whetstone or a $120 Whetstone. But I can show you this once I get this edge round done here real quick. I'm almost there. I'm gonna do one more pass here because this steel is super hard. Just feel it. One more. Okay, so this stone is a 1000, 6000 stone. And this doesn't look old. This is coming up on 13 years old. I've traveled the world with this stone. It's a Mizuyama 1000, 6000 stone. It's linked up if you go to the link in the description and go to, I bought this at Corin. If you go through that link, you'll definitely help support. But that's kind of what I think about, is I think about, okay, so this is 75 bucks, I think is what I spent for this. It's 13 years old, and I'm probably going to use it for another 10. So even if you take it up to this very day, 13 years, divided by 75 bucks, that's like $5 a year to have a sharpening stone. And so like, sure, it seems like a lot now, but like, you're not going to buy this every single year. You're not going to have to make that expense every single year. And so from that perspective, and then also like run the math of, you know, if you teach yourself DIY how to sharpen your knives and you ultimately end up, you know, doing it and enjoying it and you're able to, you know, maintain your tools and be happier at work and use knives that you're excited about, you're not going to have to go pay for a sharpener. And so just do the math of like, if you're sharpening 4 knives today, what's the math for the local knife sharpening service? And how many trips would you need to save in order for to have this stone pay for itself? Like that's how I think about this stone, is that it's paid for itself multiple times over. And so that's why like, I understand, I know what it feels like to not be able to like invest in gear, but like if you reframe it, you know, maybe it takes you a couple extra months to kind of like save up and buy this, but I have a hard time, like I just laid out a couple different examples of how this can potentially like truly be an investment for you, and you can have like positive ROI on this. And that's certainly how I thought about it. And again, you're seeing me sharpen on it right now. Like this is not a different stone than the one that I had in culinary school and at French Laundry, and I brought this to Europe with me, and yeah, it's like this stone has served me really, really, really well over the years, and I take care of it. Like I have a stone fixer, and I always make sure it's flat. Like you just showed me do the kind of side, like this is not an uneven stone. Like this is perfectly flat all the way down, which is kind of nice. Let's see. If I'm missing questions, you gotta repost your question again, just so everybody knows. You got 15 to 20 Giottos. One is stainless, but I'm not cooking for a living, so it's not so bad. Yeah, that's true. If you're in that place where you don't have to, you know, that's the worst feeling. And that's part of the, so the reason that I, and again, like wanted to schedule this, needed to sharpen my knives, blah, blah, blah. So I did a dinner on Saturday, and I just felt, it wasn't even for that many people, but I just felt it. And it wasn't even that many courses either. I wasn't prepping that much food, but I felt it when I was prepping, and I was just like, ugh. I detest that feeling of like prepping with gear that I'm not excited about. And so I had that feeling, and I was like, yep, I gotta sharpen next week. And I was looking at my calendar. I did a great podcast interview this morning, and I was looking at my calendar, and I was like, huh, I could like do a couple other things, but I also have like reasonable flexibility to do a knife sharpening session. And it's in service of the next time I go to use this, I will pick all of these knives up, and I will be like, hell yeah, like let's rock, you know? Yeah, AUS 10 is a great steel. Yeah, high carbon's great. I have no complaints on high carbon. It's the kind of like rust monsters that can be a bit of a headache. Yeah, I talk about that. I think that's another video that's kind of been like resurfacing lately is, you know, my why I won't buy a new knife video has been like getting a little bit of extra love on YouTube lately. And I talk about that. There's like a diminishing returns element to spending money on knives, because at a certain point, you either become like a collector / hoarder, or you get like me, unfortunately. Like I had to actively try to, you know, step outside my comfort zone and try to look for some other knives to include in a like what's in my knife bag video. Because if we're being honest, like I've kind of found what works for me, knife-wise. And so I'm not changing things up that much. You know, people think that it's going to be this thing where you're constantly going to be buying new knives forever, when in reality it's kind of like you get your bases covered, you figure out how you like to work, you figure out how you, things that you don't like. If anybody is just kind of like, again, super budget conscious and on the fence about purchasing stuff, I have a great video called the 20% rule, where you basically identify what type of tool or piece of gear that you're wanting, and you find an alternative that's 20% the cost, and then you use that, you get a sense of it, do I like this blade profile, do I like this steel, do I like whatever, and then you can get to this place of deciding, okay, cool, I do like this. Or you might be like me with carbon knives, and you might be like, maybe not, this isn't necessarily for me. And then you save 80% of that cost, you know? You don't end up over-investing. Okay, now we have a dilemma. I have half of a stone here. Oh, you know what I should do? Here's what we're gonna do. we're gonna form them back together so it locks in, but I'm only gonna use half the stone. Big brain meme. Big brain. Okay. I'll take a break and do some questions. Let's see. Culinary school, I love it. Shout out to culinary school folks. Yeah, splash and go stones. These require some soaking. These Mizuyamas that I recommended. Yeah, if you get some kind of splash and go style stones, those are fine. They can sometimes be a little bit more, you know, like more abrasive, less abrasive, obviously depending on the grit count. Takeda Bunka. Great question. I had a Takeda, and it was this size. So the kind of, you know, 8-inch, just under 8-inch kind of blade profile, but it was a slicer. So it was the really kind of short, but it was like nimble. It was like, Takedas are sexy. Like they're great looking knives. And the problem was it was so thin that I would go to kind of, and I would use it for, I was just using it wrong. Like I didn't use it for the right things. And so I would end up kind of like, I bent it. And so it was like, it had like a S shape to it. And after I did that to it, I think I was butchering, I don't remember what I was butchering. It was like a flatfish, and I was, you know, doing the thing where, and it's so thin that like, you press into it if you're riding bones, you know what I mean? Like you're butchering and you're trying to get the most meat off, and you're really trying to press up against the bones as a resistance piece so that you can get all of the meat off of the ribs or, you know, the back or whatever. And I was pressing, and I, you know, went to go look at it, and I was like, oh, it was like this. And then I went to try to go fix it, so I went to try to go like this, and then that ended up doing like this. And so, man, this Takeda of mine was in rough shape. I was like, how do I even come back from this? Because any little like micro adjustment that I tried to make just like made it worse. And so that, you know, made Takeda like a really, it wasn't that it gave it a bad rap. It was poor. It was user error. Like it was my fault that I did that. Because I just, you know, like with, where is it? This knife, like I can take this knife and I can just like press into it. And it just like, it's stiff. Like I like that it's stiff. Like I can press this up against stuff, and like this is straight as an arrow still. And I love that about this knife. But with the Takeda, it was like it didn't bounce back. There was no spring to it, and that really bit me. And it was unfortunate because, you know, what are you gonna do now? And so if you're working with a bunka and it's a little bit thicker, and you know, it's probably gonna serve you well. This is so weird because I'm like trying to not ride over the middle of this broken stone. I feel like I'm doing like little jittery motions here. That's the thing with like mid grit stones. I don't actually spend that much time. So what I will share, and because we've changed stones now, I can you know, pause and reflect here for a second, is that once my time on the 1,000 grit stone is done, that's like 60% of my sharpening session done. And so from here, it's more or less just kind of like working the edge up and off. You know, all those little burrs need to come off. And I'm going to the place where once I'm on my 6,000 stone, it's just a quick polishing session. And so like, as much as I just joked about these kind of like quick jittery movements, I'm not actually spending that much time on these stones. Dude, I love that you all are like making friends in the chat right now. This is awesome. Trey, I'm curious where you're at culinary school. What are my opinions on natural stones? So somebody already mentioned natural stones. They're beautiful. They're high quality. It's like a spa for your knives. Like from everybody that I've seen that uses natural stones, like it's kind of just like the next level of care. my problem is, again, like with carbon knives, with natural stones, like you just have to be, you have to baby them. Like you have to be so careful. Like I'm to a stage in my career now where I'm juggling so many things. I'm like thinking about media stuff and sponsor stuff and podcast interviews, and I have like a little team that I work with now, and I'm thinking about like sourcing the stuff and talking to clients and like writing the menus and renting this. Like there's so many things that I think about these days that like I don't want the headache, even if it would lead to kind of like a marginal increase in performance. And so that's just like, I would rather sharpen an extra couple times a year rather than get a, you know, carbon knife that is XYZ% sharper, quote unquote, or lasts a little bit longer or whatever. But that's like a personal thing. And that's, again, when I talk about like knowing how you like to work, knowing how you know, knowing your habits and your kind of like aversions to things. Like I had him on the podcast. He's a great guy, runs a shop called Seattle Edge, and he's a knife sharpening service. And the only reason he can continue to have a business is because not everybody likes to sharpen their knives. And that's okay. That's more than okay. It's when you get to this like neglecty, like you're gaslighting yourself that like your knives don't need sharpening. That's what I have a problem with. Because I want all of you folks to like enjoy spending time at work and like being with food and working with food, stuff like that. So, let's see. TCM, you're going to have to link this up. Are you willing to spend $700 on an Ohira Renge Suita? And it isn't actually that great. Yeah, that must be a natural stone. Yeah, patience is good. Patience helps. Davidson says, after I'm sharpening the knife, I have scratches on it. That means I kept the edge too low. That's correct. And so that just means that you were a little bit too kind of like pressing. So like if we're going the other way, so like I can't give a good visual here, but yeah, you're pressing too much against the stone. So you just need to raise your angle up a little bit, and that will help not get those scratches. But like you look at my UX10, I have tons of scratches on this because I went through that same learning process. You probably can't see it very well, but you know, the scratches fade over time. But yeah, for the most part, scratches happen. It's not the end of the world. Especially over time, they kind of, you know, fade right into the metal. Oh, interesting. So biggest advantage of natural stones is they wear very slowly, and it's easier to deburr on them. That's great. I think that's part of my workflow here with kind of like doing a quick touch on the 3000 in between the 1000, 6000. I've noticed that kind of change in like they deburr a lot faster when I just do this quick touch on the 3000. Whether that's a benefit or not, that's my workflow. Hell yeah, Chad in the chat. Shout out to Seattle Edge. Oh, good question from Sin Harvest on the ceramic spoon and the Gestura spoon. So the ceramic spoon was kind of a letdown, I'm going to be honest. The ceramic spoon, for all of the conversations of, you know, like taste, purity, and what else did it say? It was like temperature control, blah, blah, blah. It just, the bowl shape sucked. Like the bowl shape was just like not convenient, like too small. Like there was not enough holding power in the thing. And then consequentially, it also was like a really poor quenelle shape. So it's like, if I can't quenelle with this, and I can't sauce with it because I'm having to do like 3 scoops of sauce in order to sauce this plate. It's like, why am I using this spoon? So that was frustrating. And the Gestura spoon just like, it felt cheap. I don't know if anybody else has had that experience. Like I'm coming from, you know, like almost 100-year-old silver plated or pure silver spoons that just feel heavy. Like they just feel like, you know, even if they're thin and have these ornate designs on them and whatever, like they feel like they have some kind of like chunk to them, like they have some heft. And then you go to Gestura, which is like, I'm almost positive it's like a stamped spoon, which, you know, a lot of spoons are stamped. But like, I just didn't feel the same. I also felt like it was gonna just like bend at any moment. And so that also made me kind of like, I do not have that experience with my silver plated or silver spoons at all. Like I would have to like push my whole weight on those spoons to have those bend in any way, shape, or form. But with the Gestura, I felt like, man, if I like took it out of my knife bag in the wrong way, it was going to bend. And so, you know, one can hope that he makes kind of like a beefier version. And, you know, for all the crap that I talk on Grey Kun spoons for also being a little bit like, there's a happy medium if I had to kind of like describe my spoon feel. It's like the Gestura, the kind of like thin, you know, very streamlined, you know, elegant shape. And then the Grey Kuns, which is just like beefy, can't bend it, you know, not the best bowl shape for other things. I like somewhere in the middle. And so that's why I seek out ones like Lady Hamilton, where like Lady Hamilton, for all the, you know, like it's practically a meme now on the channel that I love my Lady Hamilton spoons, but like they're actually the perfect mix where you can quenelle with them, but they're sturdy enough where like you can look at any of my Lady Hamilton spoons in my bag, none of them are bent, none of them have kind of like issues on them, and yeah, I love my Lady Hamiltons. So that's a quick spoon rant for you guys. Okay, we're gonna do petties in a second, but like let's scroll back through the chat because you guys are really chatting here. Love it, masterful. Starting for your second job tomorrow. Good luck. That's so cool that you have been on the channel for a year and you started working the line 8 months ago. Congrats. Ouroboros, diamond sharpener will be more abrasive. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to get you, like, it's both sides. So like a diamond steel or a diamond stone is a tool. And so you need to look at it like, how do you operate that tool? How do you find your angle? How do you implement pressure? How do you maintain that consistency across the entire length? Do you know what I mean? Because you can say, oh, cool, this really abrasive knife stone is going to, you know, really give me the benefits that I'm looking for. But if you use it improperly, you can actually like really do some harm to your knives. So you gotta be careful. How often should you flatten your stones? I look to flatten my stones whenever I have just kind of like divots, I'll call them, where you like this 3000 stone needs some love, but that's because it broke and it cracked. But like there's a couple of marks like right here. There's a crack right here because when I went to go pick it up and it cracked, it fell on the ground. So like that's, I know exactly why there's this chip that happened in it. But you know, when you start to see scars and divots inside of your stone, that tends to be a good time. And you'll also see like, especially if you have a color of a stone. So like this green one, it's really easy for me to see where the marks are. But on this brown one, it's difficult for me to see where the kind of cuts and scars are in the stone here. And so it's the same with this one. So like I freshly flattened this before the sharpening session. So this is like back to perfect, you know, kind of white. But for the most part, like when you see a bunch of scars and scratches in it, that can be a really cool indication, because then you can take your stone flattener to this and your goal is to try to remove all of that. And so you're trying to get to a place where you can get that base color kind of back, because that's a good indication that all of your damage that you've done to your stone over the life of it has been removed. And it just takes time. Like get a good abrasive stone flattener. For anybody that's joining and is like cringing that I'm not using this entire stone, it's broken in half. So the reason that I did that is so that I could actually use my stone stabilizer here and get some good ergonomics going. But I can imagine that was probably driving somebody nuts if they just joined this live stream. All right, last one on this 3,000, and then we're going to shift to our 1,000, and then we will kind of wrap it up here. Yeah, if any of you folks have additional questions, pop them in the chat here, because I'm going to say there's probably like 10 or 15 minutes left on this live stream, and then we'll jump off. Definitely going for a little bit more than an hour here, but I like spending time with you guys. We haven't gone live in a while. All right, so 3,000 done. 6,000 is next. And I don't actually soak this one that much because I get nervous that it's going to crack if I do that. So push this all the way up. Cool. Scroll down. Oh, Jesus, you guys had tons of questions and I just didn't scroll enough. Okay, let's see. Oh, Travis, great question on the CIA program where you get credit for previous work experience. I didn't have the work experience part, but I went to a local community college in Wisconsin when I was in high school. And so I took my ServSafe food certification, I took nutrition, and I took, what was the other one? I don't remember. But I had quite a few credits, which actually helped with my tuition expenses when I went to CIA. And back then, they were having us do 6 months of work experience before we got into the school. But yeah, it saved me a lot of money. And so if you can get some credits to transfer, it's a good idea. Do I have any restaurants that pop into my mind when I hear best silverware? Yeah, actually, there's, I went to Cellar de Can Roca in Spain, and they are, I mean, like, talk about old school, like, they still use, like, a ton of, like, gorgeous silver-plated stuff, which I think is really, really beautiful, and I really, really enjoyed all of the silverware that they had. I just remember it being really, really nice. It's hard because like a lot of the nicest restaurants these days, they start with, I would say like a good 40%, 30 to 40% of the meal you eat with your hands. And so they just kind of like give you a ton of snacks in the beginning of your experience, and then you go into kind of the later dishes. And from there, it just becomes making sure that like it's the right service piece for the job, you know? So like if there's a sauce or like it's a deep serving vessel and you need like a spoon, you make sure to use that. Forks aren't anything special, I would say, at most restaurants. Let's try to think of another. No, I really can't, like, maybe I just don't notice. But like what I've really been enjoying the kind of rise of recently is this idea of, you know, natural made stuff. So like wooden spoons and like, you know, like cool chopsticks or like skewers. That stuff's really, really nice. But the other part that's been cool and like a dining experience that's actually been, you know, stuck in my mind for a while is there's a restaurant called Relay in Copenhagen, and they do like really modern, you know, Scandinavian serviceware, and they keep it inside of the table. And so they just drop the food. And then you as the guest are kind of responsible for picking out like, what do you want to eat this with? And then, you know, they just start your table with, you know, like 7 or 8 of each kind of service item. And it's enough to get you through the entire menu. And you just kind of like, as you need to change out your silverware, you do. And I remember seeing that and hearing about that. And then I got to eat there, and it was really, really cool to experience. But I think he was using the, what is it called? The 916 steak knives, which kind of made the rounds ages and ages ago. very similar to like Roland Lanier's stuff. Maybe it's 912. Someone can correct me. Let's see. I am using the the Kramer X Henkel sink bridge. Oh yeah, that's a good one. Using a pencil to draw on your stone and make sure that you get some marks on it, and then when you do your flattening stone, then you can see, does the pencil graphite get removed? And then you can see. Not knife related. Do you have any books that you think are must-haves? Couple come to mind. It kind of depends on what you're trying to read for. So reading Fäviken as a book was amazing from the sense of just getting the philosophy of anytime that anybody's talking about like taking a step back and being like, why are we doing this? Why does this exist in this way? Why do I have to blank? You know, like reading about Granackets, thinking about like, why do we have to have tablecloths on the table? Like that was a really cool kind of like moment for me. And because so much of like, I love following rules, folks. Like you give me a set of rules and I will just like follow it to the T. I love finding what the rules are. I love identifying kind of like what the rules of the game are. And so I need people like that for me to kind of balance that and really just kind of like, because otherwise I'll just continue with the status quo because that's what so-and-so said. And so like I get a lot of value from that type of content where people are talking about just like alternative ways to think about, you know, staffing or setup or whatever. And so yeah, the Fäviken book is great because he talks about like if we're gonna make a chicken stock, why are we putting onions and carrots and celery and garlic and thyme in our chicken stock? Like what if we just made a chicken stock? And I thought that was really cool. Another book that does that really well is the Lestrance cookbook. So L'Astrance, which is really cool. And so, yeah, just great. TCM, did you do that super chat? Thank you. Thank you, thank you. Let's see. Yeah, thanks for the super chat. Yeah, and so it's another one, like, you know, like Elements of Dessert by Francisco Migoya was like really cool for me. Talking about like pastry stuff. If you like the Bouchon Bakery cookbook, you'd probably like a lot of Francisco Migoya stuff because he does a lot of that other stuff of like rethinking why do we do this, which is cool. And then simultaneously, it's like I'm much more at the stage now where I'm less interested in kind of like how many books have I read, but it's more like what lessons have you like internalized or practiced or genuinely like made progress on or done something with this information. I have this kind of rant that I go on sometimes, which is like you can be a hoarder of information, and what you actually want to be is like a curator. Like you want to be like a museum curator where like you have a bunch of options, but you kind of cherry pick and present the best ones. And I think that makes all of us like better thinkers, better critical thinkers, better team members, more adaptable. Like that's why I titled the course or like subtitled the course like Adaptive Kitchen Productivity, because I don't want you folks to be good in like one kitchen or one station or one menu. I want the menu to change. I want the environment to change. I want the kitchen to change. I want you to go to your next restaurant and be just as successful. And so that's why I teach what I teach. Oh, cool. Adrian, you should definitely go to Lise Furquette. He just opened another restaurant, as I'm sure you've seen, in Bergen. I'm getting to your super chat, TCM. Sorry, I'm just looking through a couple of other questions here. I don't know why Corin doesn't sell bunkas, Ellie. That's a great question. Even like their selection of like Nikiri style knives. Like they don't have that many. Super curious. starting as a cook at a new restaurant next weekend. Any advice? Best piece that is just like blanket advice. You know, like I don't know what you're feeling like you're lacking on. I don't know what type of restaurant it is. I don't know what, you know, there's a lot of information missing there. But what I think does translate, you know, as just kind of a blanket rule is you're going for accuracy, not speed at the beginning. And so that becomes, you can extrapolate that to a lot of things. So don't aim to be like the first one cleaned up and you know, like broken down at the end of the night. Aim to be the one who has, you understand what broken down looks like. Don't just try to get, you know, your Parisienne scooped cucumber done the fastest. Aim to try to have like those standards of that restaurant understood and internalized so that you can correctly execute on what the prep is. And so you don't have to do it again, you know, because like people organize themselves differently. Like the Cambros are in one location. We change down here. We all change aprons before service starts. We do a breakdown at 3:30 before staff meal. Like your biggest goal is to try to understand. And so it's so common to think that you need to like go in guns blazing, show them what you're made of. But like in reality, like everybody knows you're the new guy. Everybody knows you're not going to get it on day one. And, you know, you might feel a little bit of pressure from some people, but I can promise you that it's better to be seen as kind of like a little bit slow, but like your shit's tight versus the guy who's just like, I tell the joke in the course of like the person who's just like Leroy Jenkins, just like runs into the kitchen and just like does a bunch of shit wrong and just like doesn't, you know, like is constantly like, you know, messing things up or not doing things correctly. Like that makes you stand out like a sore thumb. You going slow is like, oh, well, that's the new guy. He doesn't know how we do it, whatever. But like you're actively like causing problems. That's going to make you stand out in a bad way that it's difficult to recover from that because then you start to develop a reputation, you know? And so, you know, regardless of if it's a, you know, Japanese izakaya or a barbecue restaurant or an Italian joint, like accuracy over speed usually will serve you well. Oliver, have you checked out De Hella in Paris? That's one of my favorite shops. Unfortunately, their knife selection is not great. But what they would probably be able to tell you is where to go. Thanks for the coffee, man. Now I'm here at your super chat. Okay, trying to get into the restaurant industry, trying to get your foot in the door and get experience. Would it be better to be doing a culinary course or directly trying to get work experience? You should take my course. It's linked in the description. It's called Total Station Domination, and I have a hard time believing that it wouldn't serve you just as good as kind of like taken in tandem with your first work experience. It just like, it's everything that I wish I knew when I graduated culinary school and I was trying to get a job, and the chef that I tried to interview with wouldn't hire me because he was like, oh, well, you've only been an extern. You haven't actually worked in a kitchen before. And I was like, yeah, actually, that's right. And he put me on a station and I went down so hard. I like didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to write my prep list. I didn't know how to communicate. I didn't know how to uphold standards. I didn't know how to organize. I didn't know how to, you know, like deal with allergies. I didn't know how to move. I didn't know how to set up. I didn't know so many things. And so that's why I made this course for, is that Justin. Do you know what I mean? So if you want to take that in conjunction with some work experience, not, you know, you'd have to tell me what other culinary programs you're considering, but I try to get a little bit more practical than, you know, Escoffier or CIA. Like, and again, you can learn all of those skills, but you can like, there's YouTube videos about that stuff. I'm trying to like connect all these like young, hungry, ambitious people together, and let's work together to get more adaptable and more productive. That's what the course is all about. Da, 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 da. You have a chance to relocate to Ireland and you're looking to get into restaurants. Great question, Alice. We're done, by the way. So I'm going to effectively just kind of like wipe down, and then I do kind of like a quick sharpening test just to see where everything's at and make sure that we're in a good spot. And then that's not right. Let's do it like that. Do a little rinse. Okay. Alice, especially if like you're craving some travel in your life, or you can see that there's going to be like benefits to knowing people in Ireland for you. I think I mean, like, even to take my experience, right? Like, I moved to Norway for 3 years. I had no goals of working in Norway or just kind of, but what's cool is like anytime anybody kind of like meets me or wants to talk to me about food or anything like that, I always have that kind of like, I worked abroad can kind of be like part of my story. And I think what's really cool about that is that, ooh, you're very sharp here. That's great, actually. That makes me very happy. That's just a part of my story. And I have international connections now, and I just wanted to get that bug scratched. Like, that itch needed to be scratched for me, like living abroad and working with an international team, and not just saying that my experience was with the US. So, like, you have to reflect that question back on your goals. Like, if you have the goal of opening a place and the place is in Philadelphia and everybody from Philly happens to have worked at all the same places, and you moving to Ireland is going to give you a competitive advantage in that environment, on that playing field, then Ireland is a great choice. If you're going to tell me that like you just want to go because you think that you're going to be able to get some, you know, hotline experience, or someone has told you that they're going to be able to offer you a job that gives you, like, could you get that elsewhere, might be the question that you ask yourself. And if the answer to that is yes, then that's, potentially, you need to weigh that. And then you might need to say, so like, what's an example? I told myself that I wanted to be on, work at a 3 Michelin star restaurant. And when that's my goal, that's really cool because I have a bunch of different options. Because there's tons of 3 Michelin star restaurants out there in the world. Whereas if I'm going to tell myself that I need to learn about, like old-timey Irish cuisine, you only probably have a couple of places to go. So you got to kind of reflect it off of your goals. Oh, cheers. Culinary school in Australia. I love it. Do you judge other chefs on the quality of their knives and their ability to use them? Question from Steve. I had a chef that I worked for who had kind of like a very similar knife to this Togiharu one that I'm, sharpening over here. And he used a diamond sharpening steel. And talking about using them, he would hone his knife and then he would go and cut kampachi. And all of his fish slices had like gray bits of steel on them. And I was like, dude, you do not know what you're doing. And that was like, I don't know if I necessarily respect your knife skills. I respect other parts of you, because he was one of my sous chefs. And yeah, so that's hard. But you'd be surprised how many chefs, sorry, I booped the mic there. You'd be surprised how many chefs don't know their way around, knives, just in general, and working with them. Okay, let's see. Do you feel like it's worth it to work at a restaurant for the name's sake? So, Grant Achatz has this great piece of advice which says something to the effect of you work at a place for one of three things: the money, the experience, or the resume. And obviously that falls apart with some other factors that you can introduce, like location and your family life and work hours and all those sorts of things that people are finally starting to prioritize now. But for the most part, I think that holds up, because you can go to a place that Daniel Boulud talks about this, where he says you'll learn more cleaning lobsters at a 3 Michelin star kitchen than you will working the grill at a bistro, something to that effect. And but I think what people miss with that piece of advice is the time horizon that you need to think about with that. So you can spend 2 years cleaning lobsters at a 3 Michelin star restaurant, but you've learned all that you need to learn about that kitchen in the first 3, 5, 7, 9 months, especially if you're not moving, right? So like in your position, it's not to say that you've learned everything there is to know because you haven't worked every station yet. So obviously there's things to learn. But I think people get caught in thinking that like, oh, well, so-and-so told me that I need to work here for a year, or so-and-so told me that I need to whatever. When in reality, they're not taking into context, like asking themselves the genuine question of, am I still learning? And if you're not, that can be really harmful, right? Because then now all of a sudden, you know what I should do? I should do like a knife showcase here. And then we can get some, this is risky business. It's actually not that risky. Everything is very well balanced, as all things should be. So yeah, don't, ask yourself like, am I still learning at this place? And that can tend to, either help you or hurt you. Okay. Work at a restaurant just for the namesake. So I'm going back on this tangent again, but like, if you work at a place that has name recognition, so I tell this story sometimes where I worked at Lisforket on the west coast of Norway. And when I moved there wasn't a Michelin guide presence in Bergen. And so there was no chance in hell that we were going to get a Michelin star because there wasn't even a guide there. I learned more in the 3 years working at that restaurant than I did in the 6 years prior to that through culinary school and, and I had some principles that I brought. It's not to say that I didn't learn anything, but like net learnings, I learned way more in Bergen than I did anywhere else. And when I moved to Seattle and I was starting to do pop-ups and I would get like, food writers and journalists from Eater talking to me about my food and whatever, they would ask me about my background and I would say, oh, well, I worked at French Laundry, I worked at Grace, I went to culinary school here, I did whatever. And I would say, oh, and I'm coming off of a stint in Scandinavia. I was working in Norway. And they would say like, oh, well, and I would say I worked at Lisforket. I wasn't lying about where I worked, but they would say, oh, don't you know of that other place in Scandinavia? It's called Noma. And I was like, oh, yeah, I started at Noma because I did. It was in 2011, but I started at Noma. And that's what would make it into their article, is talking about Justin Kana, who has experience at Noma. And I thought that was so weird because it was like, I want you to talk about Lisforket because like that's where I learned, that's where I was a manager, like that's where I was a sous chef, that's where I learned how to cook protein and butcher and like do all this cool stuff. But like the name recognition I learned in that moment is so powerful because it gives a reference point to people. People can understand, oh yeah, I've heard of that place, especially if you're trying to like do mass market stuff and you're talking to people who don't know restaurants and food that well. It can be really, really hard to, yes, Matthias, it's Bergen. So going to somewhere for the namesake, when I was talking about that experience at Noma, the reason that what I was picking up during that time there is like people would go, they would come from India and they would come from Indonesia and they would come from the Philippines and they would come work at Noma for a month just so that they could come back to wherever they were from and have a little bit of name recognition for themselves. And that was really valuable for them. And then the third one is the money. So it's like, what are you learning? That's the experience. What is this saying? So that's a resume. Like that's a signaling thing. And then the money is just like you see people who like, I had a friend who had I think it was $113,000 a year job offer in Dubai to be the head chef of a hotel out there. It's like, he's not really going to get that much experience. Like he knows how to do this food. The hotel nobody has probably ever heard of. It's like some big, fancy whatever. And it doesn't track with the experiences that he wants to do after this. But the money is really good. And he'd ultimately turned it down. But like, you can see how one of these three, and sometimes you get places that give you all three. So like friends of mine who have, spent 5 years at French Laundry. They get the name recognition. They got the experience because they made it to sous chef. And when they made that bump up to sous chef, like they got a reasonable amount of money out of it too. So you can see all of these kind of coming into play here. Difficult time finding a good, comfortable, stable, and sharp serrated knife. You can hopefully still hear me. This is a great one. This is the Mac scalloped bread knife. Depending on what you're cutting, I would use this for brioche because I had to make a lot of like brioche soldiers is what we would call them. So like batons and dice of bread. This knife is great because it doesn't have the teeth on it. And I mean, it has teeth, it has serrations, but they're scalloped. And so these don't get as kind of bitey, if that makes sense. This actually feels properly sharp, which is kind of cool. So I hope that helps, Ellie. Does a honing rod sharpen your knife or hone it? And does it take off material? So I told that story of that sous chef who used a diamond honing rod, and he was absolutely taking material off of his knife when he was... Does that sound better or worse? Anyways. It's important just to monitor it. So like if you run your knife along your honing rod, zip, 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 and then you take like a white paper towel like this, and you wipe it along the edge, and you look, is there material on it? And if yes, you're taking material off of your steel. And if not, then you're not. And I'm glad that you asked the difference between sharpening and honing, because there is a difference. But that's why I do sessions like this, because stone sessions actually end up reshaping the edge. Honing moves the edge, develops burrs, you know what I mean, aligns things back into place. And for some people, things that people don't acknowledge sometimes is honing can often remove food off of it too, if you're not like that kind of like detailed with cleaning your knives too, which can really, really help. Yeah, Chojiro bread knife's also great. Thanks, Steve. That's right. Restaurants are an attraction. That's a great similarity where, you know, people can get successful as an actor working in multiple different fields, but the second that you work on a movie that gets an Oscar nomination, all of a sudden everybody wants to, you know, hang out. Cool. Thank you all for joining this live stream. I hope it was helpful with just all the questions. Friendly reminder that there's 2 weeks left to enroll in Total Station Nomination. Leave a like on this video if you got some value. I always forget to ask that. And yeah, it's promo pricing now up until the 20th. And so there's just 4 more days left of promotional pricing on Total Station Nomination. So you can save some cash there. And then we go up to full retail price. But yeah, it's all the principles that I teach to achieve adaptive kitchen productivity. So regardless of the environment, you can take these skills with you wherever you go. And if you want to shop any of the knives that I kind of showed here, not all of them are available. Like this was a custom one that I had made. But, you know, for example, the sharpening stones, I have all these sharpening stones from Corin. So if you shop that link in the description, you certainly help out the channel, which is very, very appreciated. Rex in Boston. I have not eaten in Boston. I haven't been to Boston since I was in culinary school. So it's been over 10 years since I've been in Boston. And I need to go back because I have some, my wife's has some family friends who live in Boston and they love it. And my dad actually has someone he went to school with who lives in Boston. They just bought a house in New Hampshire, whatever. So like I've been meaning to make it to Boston, just haven't yet. So it is what it is. Yeah, and everybody else leave recommendations for Boston if we have it. But anyways, great to see all of you and spend some time this afternoon. I hope your knives are sharp now that you spent some time chilling with me, and we will talk next time. Hope you all have a good one.